Perfect. So our group today will be presenting about sustaining traditions and ecosystems in indigenous fishing practices and their role in marine conservation. Can you go to the next slide, please? So today I'll be, no, back one. Yeah, sorry. So today I'll be covering the foundational concepts and innovative approaches in fish and wildlife management, and we'll be focusing particularly on the two-eyed seeing approach. So let's start by understanding what fish and wildlife management is really all about. It's essential for ensuring biodiversity and maintaining ecosystem balance. Effective management involves methods like habitat restoration, population control, and species monitoring. These efforts not only support wildlife, but also safeguard the sustainability of our ecosystems. However, managing fish and wildlife is not without its challenges. Issues like habitat loss due to human development, climate change disrupting migration patterns, and overfishing depleting fishing populations are quite pressing concerns. Illegal activities as well, such as poaching, further jeopardize many species and disrupt ecosystems. These challenges make it clear why innovative approaches are necessary to achieve sustainable conservation. So one such innovative approach is the concept of two-eyed seeing. This framework combines the strengths of indigenous knowledge with Western sciences for us. And the idea is to integrate traditional ecological practices rooted in cultural understanding and lived experiences with scientific research to create a more holistic and effective management solution. This dual perspective ensures that we honor traditional wisdom while also leveraging modern tools that are available to us today. So indigenous knowledge plays a crucial role in two-eyed seeing. For instance, indigenous communities often have a deep understanding of a species' life cycle and population dynamics. They practice sustainable harvesting by aligning activities with seasonal migrations, ensuring minimal impact on said ecosystem. And through this approach, we can achieve a natural balance and preserve biodiversity for future generations and so on. So next, I'll share a few examples of where two-eyed seeing has been applied effectively in this approach. The first would be something known as controlled burns. It's an indigenous method of using fire to clear invasive species that has been paired with some sort of scientific monitoring, and it promotes the growth of native plants to help restore different habitats. Another good example would be something called fish wires. These are traditional tools that are used to manage fish populations sustainably, allowing smaller or non-targeted fishes to escape, and thus it's able to preserve breeding stocks and prevent overfishing. Another good example of this would be something known as no-take zones. These zones act as refuge where fishing is prohibited, and it allows fish populations to recover and helps maintain biodiversity. These protected areas also serve as safe havens for endangered species, preventing population decline and fostering a healthy ecosystem. By combining traditional and modern approaches, we can achieve sustainable management practices that can inevitably help us resolve this entire issue.
Hi there, everyone. So today I will be going over the various triumphs and successes of two-eyed seeing. So as you can see, we have an overview of successes with our conservation efforts yielding exceptional results in wildlife preservation. We've witnessed a significant increase in biodiversity across our protected areas, with multiple species showing promising recovery trends. As for the eco-resilience, we've made substantial progress in strengthening our natural systems. Our enhanced environmental resilience programs have created more robust ecosystems that can better withstand climate fluctuations and other environmental pressures. This increased stability is crucial for long-term ecological sustainability. And as for the sustainable practices, let me just highlight a couple key ones to you. Our carbon storage initiatives have significantly improved, helping combat climate change. Water purification systems have been enhanced, ensuring cleaner water resources. Land use management has been optimized for long-term sustainability. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we also went over a case study. This is the first one we went over. We went over two of them. So this one is in regards to Nisqually's tribe's salmon restoration over at Washington State.
I was just going to say she probably used bad.
So just some background on that. We have the estuary restoration, which the refuge restored 762 acres of the Nisqually estuary through the removal of dikes, which is the largest estuary restoration project in the region. We have the fish passage improvement. in which the tribe received $5.8 million in funding to remove and replace a culvert that was completely blocking fish passage on Brighton Creek. And this project will allow Puget Sound steelhead as well as Chinook salmon to reach their high quality habitat. Lastly, they had their biofiltration project. So the Nisqually tribe, in partnership with other organizations, piloted a biofiltration unit to address the issue of toxic roadway runoff, particularly the tire dust chemical, which is deadly to coho salmon. The project showed promising results with a 90% reduction in the tire dust through the device's use. Therefore, you could see that they have ongoing efforts as these battles are not done. Currently, the Nisqually tribe continues to prioritize salmon restoration through their grant proposals, in which they're actively seeking grants for salmon habitat restoration and to protect the projects within their area, as well as ongoing research, monitoring, and evaluation of salmon recovery projects, which can be accessed through the Salmon Recovery Portal. Next slide, please. Perfect. The second case we'll be going over is that of the Ecological Restoration Project. So the Ecological Restoration Project demonstrates how traditional and modern approaches can work in harmony. There are two methodological components. The traditional approach, in which indigenous land stewardship methods emphasize seasonal care and species respect, and that these time-honored practices reflect generations of ecological knowledge and sustainable resource management. As for the scientific methods, alongside the traditional practices, the project implemented rigorous scientific approaches, including data-driven restoration techniques, comprehensive habitat monitoring, and systematic ecological assessments. The results and impact of this are that we observed significant ecological recovery across the restoration sites, measurable improvements in biodiversity, and the establishment of balanced ecosystems that now support sustainable wildlife populations, with the key takeaway being that the combination of traditional ecological knowledge and scientific methodology creates a more robust and effective approach to ecosystem management. Lastly, I have the broader impact on policy and collaboration. So the successive initiatives like Two-Eyed Seeing have fundamentally transformed our approach to environmental policies. This innovative framework combines traditional indigenous knowledge with the contemporary scientific methods, creating more comprehensive and effective conservation strategies. The increased recognition of indigenous knowledge in official conservation practices represents a significant shift in how we approach environmental management. So as for the indigenous rights, a key outcome has been the strengthening of indigenous rights in land and resource management worldwide. These collaborative efforts have established crucial precedents for indigenous sovereignty as well as self-determination and environmental stewardship. And lastly, for some of their collaborative achievements, the partnerships formed between indigenous communities and governments have proven transformative, as these relationships have created sustainable resource management frameworks, established models for joint stewardship, and demonstrated the effectiveness of combining traditional and modern conservation approaches.
So basically, there are still many challenges and barriers to overcome when it comes to Two-Eyed Seeing, and that's what I'll be talking about. So a quick overview of some of the barriers. We have our recognition of indigenous knowledge, which is referring to the resistance of treating indigenous knowledge on par with Western science. Cultural barriers, which brings challenges in from different worldviews and communication styles between indigenous communities and scientific bodies. You have also institutional and political resistance, which comes from government policies and legal frameworks that don't support or recognize the inclusion of indigenous practices. And finally, we have resource allocation, basically limited funding and resource for collaborative projects. On the first barrier, knowledge and recognition and equity, institutions like healthcare and academia often will prioritize Western science over indigenous knowledge. There's a lack of respect for indigenous knowledge and cause indigenous insights to be undervalued. Because indigenous knowledge is validated through lived experience, oral histories, and cultural practices, it makes it more challenging for institutions, Western institutions, to recognize it. many of these institutions lack frameworks to incorporate two-eyed seeing principles effectively. Without structured approaches, institutions may struggle to integrate indigenous and Western knowledge in a way that respects both equally. On barrier to political and legal hurdles, indigenous communities have different laws and governance, so it creates legal challenges when attempting joint approaches. Government policy is usually based on Western framework, which makes it harder to incorporate these indigenous knowledges in the policies. And there's a complex division between federal, provincial, and indigenous governments, which also hinders the cooperation between them. There are still problems relating to indigenous sovereignty and land disputes as well, which have some legal battles or problems still going on. There's also the cultural and systemic resistance, where people accustomed to Western science may be resistant due to their beliefs that they've already have, that indigenous knowledge lacks empirical rigor that they're using in Western science. There's also limited awareness of two-eyed seeing to begin with, seeing it, which makes it difficult to recognize its value. There's also prejudice and stereotypes about indigenous people and indigenous knowledge practices that some institutions still carry, and established systems, especially in education and healthcare, are often more resistant to changing. In many institutions, there is a lack of indigenous representation and leadership roles, which also brings a problem to actually bringing change. There's still work left to be done. So next step for integrations, you could do things like policy changes, for example, are would be one good way, with creating frameworks that give indigenous communities equal decision-making power in projects and policies. Incorporating the UNDRIP from the UN, which would fully allow indigenous sovereignty and knowledges to be represented. Implementation of mandatory consultation with indigenous groups in research, resource management, and public projects. Also dedicating time to and resources to educating people like who are still in school about what two-eyed seeing is and how it can be helpful would be very fundamental to its growth. Also creating funding streams specifically for projects that embody two-eyed seeing principles and resources for indigenous communities to lead their own research and development projects. And there is also still opportunity for growth where to combine traditional indigenous land stewardship methods with scientific approaches to develop more sustainable land use policies. You can also, like, for example, indigenous fire management techniques such as cultural burnings, which can complement scientific forestry practices to reduce wildfire risk and promote a healthy forest. You can partner with indigenous groups to create urban conservation programs that involve local communities and honor traditional perspectives and integrate indigenous knowledge about water cycles and ecosystems to improve watershed management and projects protect aquatic habitats.
Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. And I'll take over for the ending here for the summary. So as you can see, we just have a summary of key points for you guys, just what we went over in our presentation today. So going through them, we have the importance of fish and wildlife management for ecosystem health and sustainability, the role of two-eyed seeing in bridging indigenous knowledge and Western science, triumphs, challenges, and future opportunities for deeper integration of this approach in wildlife conservation. Went over some real-world examples such as Nisqually's tribe's salmon restoration in Washington State, as well as the Ecological Restoration Project. And lastly, we discussed next steps to further promote and encourage fish and wildlife management for ecosystem health, like the incorporation of UNDRIP. On behalf of all my group members, as well as myself, I would like to thank all of you for sharing your time and listening. Also, special thanks to Dr. Bailey and Steve for the knowledge they have shared with us.
Thanks very much. Paul, any thoughts before we wrap this up?
Other than that the impact assessment is supposed to really be inclusive of Indigenous knowledge, and it's a real struggle to get them how they're going to weight that particular item into their assessment. So we've been working at this issue for a while. Very good paper, and any leaps and bounds that we've made up in this particular territory hasn't been because somebody's seen the way it's about a fight and not giving up on from our side on these particular issues where we want our heritage and knowledge systems to come into play on these particular issues in our territory. Miigwech.